To my live stream. My name is Nick Dagan Best, and this is my astrology live stream. The Bernie Sanders on Capitol Hill in mittens of astrology live streams. Um, all right, hope you folks are all doing well. As usual, I turn on the camera and I don't have a clue what I'm going to talk about. Well, that's not exactly true. Um, as some of you may know, maybe all of you know, depending on how many of you are watching. I recently released a few files from my database for sale on the Astrology Podcast website, theastrologypodcast.com slash database. So yes, and I thought with that, quite a few people have been buying it. And I just wanted to talk a bit about the three files that I put up for sale and maybe some of my plans for where I'm going to go with this commercial database project moving forward. So for years, basically, just some background. Starting, I guess, around about the spring of 1999, when I first got my hands on a copy of Solar Fire version 4. This was the newest version that had just come out of Solar Fire technology at the time. And um, when I got right away when I got the software, I immediately started making a lot of different charts that I had always wanted to look up, sort of, charts, not just the birth charts of, say, the Beatles, who I was always fascinated with, but also charts of their different concerts and recording sessions, and when they all met, and when they did this thing or that thing, or took that journey or that journey. All the stuff, just anything that pertained to their lives, their weddings, the births of their children. And I just kept sort of duplicating that approach with making different files on certainly at first more and more musicians and filmmakers, and then later as I progressed, I got a lot more interested in just sort of political history and social history. I had been when I was younger a very, very sort of keen history student. And so, it was only a matter of time before that sort of came back. Anyway, long story short, I've been uh, keeping this sort of digital notebook of charts for over 2 decades now, and developing it along the way. Sometimes with great bursts of energy, and sometimes just little bits and bobs at a time. And yeah, basically with some urging on Chris's part. Um, Chris Brennan and Patrick Watson. I mean, I supplied them with versions of my database years ago, and they've both used it in sort of advancing their own astrological study. And that was always the intention, is to have this tool that a lot of different people could use. Um, so yeah, Chris encouraged me to put it up for sale, and I'm really pleased that he did, because it's working out well so far. But yeah, I thought I would just, like I said, open up my software here and show you guys the three files that I have to offer, and what you can do with them. I think that's maybe the thing I can offer you most now. Like now, if you either you have the thing, or like Bruce just said in the chat that they're going to buy it soon, which is great. Um, you know, um, but once you have it, what do you do with it? Okay, so this is my Solar Fire. You can customize this background. So I put this image of planet Earth that I got from a natural science museum in Johannesburg, South Africa. So I took the picture with my phone and then just put it up there on my Solar Fire background. But you can put any image you like up there, or color, or what have you. All right, so this is my database, and as you can see, there are a lot of files in here. I believe the number is 700 and something, but don't quote me on that. But that's the ballpark. And you can see they're just like any kind of, everyone from Barbara Walters to Barbara Streisand to Barack Obama to Ben Affleck and Benedict Arnold and Benicio del Toro and Benito Mussolini. So it's just like any kind of person like that, any number of people. Errol Flynn, Ethel Merman, Ernest Hemingway, Eric Dolphy, Eric Clapton, Enzo Ferrari. Just I mean, I can go on and on and on. And some of these files aren't very big. They'll just have a few charts in them. Like I just sort of started a little thing and never finished it. So it's true. The vast majority aren't that big. But then there are these files where I really sort of dug in and created something fairly, approaching a sort of definitive breakdown of the life. Like for instance, my Richard Nixon file has 220 charts, including birthdays for all the different sort of people who were involved in his life, on his staff or his enemies or any of that kind of stuff, and then these different events in his life and his presidency. So there's a lot of that kind of thing. But that's not those aren't the files that I have up for sale yet. Eventually I want to have something up on my database where they're all sort of available individually, and so that they're affordable, and even serious astrologers on tight budgets, might still be able to afford, I don't know, $6, $4, whatever a given file is. Some of the larger ones, like this one, certainly, when I put it on my website, right now the price is very good. The price will definitely go up. I'm offering 3 for the price of $20, and I'm pretty sure this one alone will at least, yeah. I have to figure it out, but this one is quite big, and it'll be more sort of expensive. I put these 3 files out for $20 as an introductory offer. So definitely, if you don't want to wind up paying more for the 3 of them later on, it's a good idea to rush and get them. There will be an update offered, one free update offered on the 3 files in a little while. And but then after that, it'll be sort of like you pay a little bit of money every, maybe every year I put up an update, and you can pay an extra, couple of bucks or something like that. I don't know. I'm still figuring out the model. But here, this is the general natal file. And I mean, it's got all the birthdays that I have in all the other files, and just any kind of person, right down to, the grandchildren of Donald Trump, or the, child of Elon Musk. With those are the most recent, but I mean, it can be any number of people, Lindsay Lohan, um, Prince William, just, I mean, anyone, James Franco, people you like, people you despise. It really, everyone I can sort of fit in there is in there. David Beckham, Angelina Jolie, Russell Brand. Just people that we know and who can be studied astrologically, or who might be curious astrological. Oh, yeah, there's the new Speaker of the House. So on and so forth. Now, what you can do with a file like this, I mean, or any of the files that I have, well, this is something this is one thing that Patrick and I were doing on the team stream yesterday. So a lot of you would have seen it, but just to sort of apply it more broadly to the general natal file, this is a search where I'm looking for the sun in Aquarius combined with periods when the speed of Mars is very, very slow, like just before a retrograde and the retrograde itself. And so if I do this search and it goes through that whole file, um, out of the 13,865 charts in this particular chart file, it seems that we have 256, which is 1.85%. But some really interesting names in there. I mean, I already talked about how Abraham Lincoln had it, but it's interesting also that William Tecumseh Sherman and Stonewall Jackson, all the, like all these, and Joseph Johnson. Yeah, there's like 4 people who are really key figures. If you don't know, those other 3 guys are generals in either the Union or Confederate armies. And so it's really curious that like that many important figures in the American Civil War had that really sort of peculiar, unique, and fairly rare combination of having the sun in Aquarius with a Mars retrograde station. Other people like the poet Lord Byron, Aaron Burr, who was, if you don't remember, the vice president of the U.S. when Thomas Jefferson was president, and he he killed the Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, right? The musical. Yeah, he's the guy who kills him in the duel, and then has to go on the run and all that stuff. Mozart is another one of these Aquarians, it seems. And then when we go, later in history, blues musician, Blind Willie Johnson, Lillian Disney, who I think is the wife of Walt Disney, Jackson Pollock, the painter, former mayor of Montreal, Jean Drapeau, Sam Cooke, the great singer, Vic Morrow, the actor who was killed while filming Twilight Zone, the movie, the great session drummer, Hal Blaine, who played in a lot of, like Beach Boys records and a lot of Phil Spector's early records, things like that. Yeah, just all kinds of people. Yoko Ono, that's right. She's one of them. Aquarius. She has Mars retrograde in Virgo. Kim Novak, the actress. So you can see, I mean, this is just one particular thing that I looked at, right up to more recent examples. Christina Ricci, Ashton Kutcher, Baby Spice, right? Laura Dern, Chris Rock. Okay, there we go. We're getting the picture here. So that's just one particular search. I could also just decide, who's got. Maybe I just want to know a sign. Maybe I want to know who's got Saturn in Aries. What the heck? Over the years, and then again, it's going to pull up this list of just people in the file who have Saturn in Aries. So yeah, you can see that out of the 13,865 charts in the database, 7.6% have Saturn in Aries. And again, you can go from Peter the Great of Russia all the way to Robert Smith Todd, who was, I believe, the father of Mary Todd Lincoln. Because I keep people like that in the file, parents of famous people and things like that. Dostoevsky. Nathan Bedford Forrest, yeah, all kinds of people. So yeah, there's any number of sort of surveys like this you can do. You can look for planets in aspect to each other. How many of these people have let's say Mars square Jupiter, but let's even make it in sign. Let's make it so that only when Mars is in Aries and Mars is square Jupiter. And we could do a or. We could take this and we could change it to an or we can just keep it an and, which we'll do here. And now it's going to search for charts that have this combination of two charts, and it's a very small percentage, 0.38%. Only 52 charts out of 13,865 have Mars squared Jupiter while Mars is in Aries. That's a really interesting fact, actually. And look at this, this list of names is formidable. Oliver Cromwell, who led the English Civil War, overthrew the king. Mary Wollstonecraft, the great feminist author and mother of Mary Shelley. She actually died in childbirth, giving birth to Mary Shelley. The great engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Alexandra Kollontai, who was a Bolshevik and a lover of Lenin. And yeah, just, again, a pretty formidable list of people here, right down to Margot Robbie is the most recent example. How about that? Welcome aboard, Barbie. Maggie Haberman, whose book about Donald Trump I just read, she's a New York Times reporter who wrote this biography of Trump not long ago. She's someone who he's always complaining about, but he always talks to. So she has really intimate access to him, even though she's clearly sort of hostile to him. It's an interesting arrangement the two of them have. The late, great Robbie Robertson, who the guitarist who played with Bob Dylan in the band, the songwriter behind a lot of the band's music. Looks like he's in there as well with, he's got Mars in Aries square Jupiter and Taurus, so Jupiter and Leo rather. So I guess this is looking at just the orb and not necessarily squares by sign. But you can add extra settings to do that. Good old Geraldo Rivera, one of my favorite people to study. Rod Serling of Twilight Zone fame. Actually, Peter Cushing, who Star Wars fans will remember him as Grand Moff Tarkin. I was actually just watching an old Dracula movie where he plays Van Helsing. And Christopher Lee, who would be Sauron in Lord of the Rings, plays Dracula. Anyway, yeah, so this is just some of the many ways that you can use these files. Of course, most recently, um, Chris and I were using my database to do all the research behind the eclipse episode we did. We've taped a sequel to the eclipse episode, which is coming out tomorrow. And in fact, actually, many episodes of the Astrology podcast have made use of the database for research to supply material that was discussed. Even episodes that I'm not in, that I don't appear on. So okay, Chelsea's saying, I watched yesterday's episode this morning. I want to mention Mike Johnson, new speaker, was born on a lunar eclipse in Leo. Yeah, yeah. We talked about that, Chelsea. That's coming up tomorrow. If you're not a patron of the Astrology podcast, you haven't seen it yet. Patrons have seen it, but tomorrow it's coming out. I'm on a second episode of the Astrology podcast with Chris Brennan, where we're doing more material on eclipses. And yes, thank you, that whole thread about Mike Johnson. But I think we even discussed it yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. I've been discussing this a few times. The fact that the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, was born January 30th, 1972, close to an eclipse. And he's born like a day after Amy Coney Barrett and 10 days after Nikki Haley. So there's a whole sort of lineage of these Republican Aquarians born close to an eclipse in early 1972. In the Aquarius of 72 period. Yeah, Stephanie confirms that I did talk about that. All right. So that answers your next question, Chelsea. Yes, it absolutely does fit into the eclipse theory. Okay, Stephanie's asking, what is the file format? Wondering if it'll work with Planet Dance. Conceivably, there's someone who's already converted it for Sirius, it seems, and on Twitter they talked about how they did it. Eventually, I'm going to sort of consolidate all this, but I'm not terribly well informed yet. My suspicion is that it's something that can be converted and used on most other astrology softwares, but I don't want anyone to sort of quote me on that yet. As I sort of as I said, this initial offer is a sort of introductory thing. $20 is pretty cheap for what's on offer. But one of the reasons is that it's very cheap is, it's not terribly organized or thought out yet. This was really just, first of all, like putting up for sale for $20 gives me the sort of, the leeway to take a little time to put together the whole sort of commercial project on my site, so that you guys can access everything easily and get updates and all that. And when I get it to that stage, when it's all sort of organized, and then I can really sort of be, try to present present it in a way where, like, even if you're using other software, I can guide you. I'll be informed in terms of what softwares it works with and which ones it doesn't. But yeah, it's all terribly new, so I can't answer that question just yet. But maybe ask the people at Planet Dance. I don't know Planet Dance. Let's see what else is going on here. Okay, B Havens is having a root canal. Well, have a good time. Stephanie says, I wonder what the chart configuration is for cloning your animals is for Streisand. I don't know anything about that, Stephanie. I didn't know I'm not I did notice like years ago, that Barbara Streisand had a really interesting Venus retrograde pattern in her life. So I did put together a little file for her, but I found her music really hard to listen to. When I study someone, I really try to get deep into what their lives were about. So if they're authors, I read their works, and if they're musicians, I listen to their music. But I just I found it really hard. So I don't know anything about that cloning example. I think the last event I have in her chart is maybe like from 1998. She got married or something like that, or a concert she had in 86. So it's not a very up-to-date Barbara Streisand file. But then if there were suddenly a lot of people interested in a Barbara Streisand file, I can always sort of develop it. I have the means. Anyway, You were making a humorous reference to something that I happen to be poorly informed about. I'm just not boned up on my Streisand trivia, I'm afraid. Real Darko Arts. Had to miss yesterday while I was on the way back from a wedding. Hyped to be here today, though. All right, cool, cool, cool. Number one on the Christmas list. Yeah, well, soon everything's going to be up for sale on my website. I mean, not soon, but probably before Christmas. You might not want to wait that long because the prices are going to go up. Arit Matt, with the sale of your database, I'm curious what transits progressions correlate. Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think the biggest thing happening in my chart right now is actually that I'm about to have a level 2 loosing of the bond. I mean, I'm technically sort of having it already, or I'm sort of in the throes of it. So there's that. There's just kind of a sort of a professional peak of some kind. That's the main thing, I think. Okay, she cloned her dogs. I had no idea. That's what you can do. Oh, I prepared a long list of Turkish history for your next eclipse episode. If you even do it, I watched the second one; it was amazing. Okay, cool. Thank you, Ebru. Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of books. Like, have a biography of Ataturk, and some other books about sort of like modern Turkish history, but they're still like sort of from the 20s and 30s, covering that period. So I know there's a lot to sort of bone up on. I've got a number of books about the Ottoman Empire, and I'm also sort of interested in the period of the Mongols, and all that sort of cultural crossover, the Silk Road. So I'm getting further and further into getting some boning up on that knowledge, but definitely a really good sort of more expert coverage of Turkish history would be really, really welcome. As Chris and I were talking about on the Astrology podcast, we're not experts in these different fields. I've certainly been trying. In the last few years, I've been reading a lot. My file on Turkish history, I'll show you. It's not terribly impressive, but I'll show you what I've sort of made so far. But this is what would really benefit from this kind of help and suggestion. My file for Turkish history only has 86 charts. And a lot of them really sort of, I mean, we're looking at some of them are Byzantine era, so it's not the same. It's the previous, empire that occupied that territory. And then there's the fall to the Ottoman siege. And then I have a bunch of events in the history of the Ottoman Empire, different wars and treaties, certain individuals when I have birthdays for them. And there's Erdogan's chart, but you can see not much. There was some different bombings and things like that. So really just a few things. More sort of Ottoman history. You can see in Balkan history that involved the Ottoman Empire, things like that. I have a few Turks in here. Yildirim, the 27th Prime Minister of Turkey. Whoops, wrong country. Minister of Foreign Affairs, 26th Prime Minister. Erdogan, as I said, the 12th president. So just a few people. So as you can see, I mean, that's a really paltry amount, frankly. If you have great suggestions for us to use if we do a third episode, you never know. Maybe we will. Do I have a Patreon account? Yes, I do have a Patreon account. Just look up Nick Dagan Best on Patreon. I've got it set up to make videos, which I'm still working on. And when I have the videos out, that's what I was expecting to sort of charge people for. The live stream is really a super, that chart I have, the birth of Turkey I have. Sorry, I wind up answering 2 questions at once. Yeah, look up my name on Patreon if you wanna support me on Patreon, that would be really welcome. It's not super, super active right now, but very appreciated. Okay, well, thank you, Ebru. Yeah, well, I'm sure yours is bigger. I mean, obviously, you're gonna know a lot more than I do. I know bits and bobs. There are things that are not in my database that I do know. I read this very interesting book once called Midnight at Pera Palace. And actually, when I was in Istanbul, I went to see where this place was. There was this hotel, um, on the Asian side of Istanbul, where a lot of these, sort of different, people from different parts of the recent, World War One, were sort of living as refugees, and you had, former Russian generals operating the elevator at this hotel, and just the different people who were coming in and out of the country as the country itself was defining itself. So that was a book that made a strong impression on me, and I certainly loved visiting Istanbul. I was there in 2017, but I hope to go back someday. So yeah, that's fantastic. That's exactly the kind of contribution we were hoping to have, is to get some help in assembling a real sort of worldview, an astrological worldview, one that's conscious of everybody on the planet. Um, okay, Ebru knows the Para Palace. Okay, yeah, yeah, amazing hotel. Well, I did walk around. I didn't stay there. It was a little outside my budget, but although I had a great place that was very close to the Hagia Sophia. But yeah, I went for a really nice walk across the bridge, and I walked around the hotel, and I went into the lobby just to look around because I had just read the book when I was there. So yeah, it was really interesting to see that. Well, that's great. Thank you for contributing that. Um, Bliss to Be's asking, can I talk a little bit about Saturn crossing the midheaven 10th house? Um, um, I mean, whose 10th house? It, the, yeah, those questions, I would never just sort of talk about Saturn crossing the midheaven on its own, without a context. Is it a diurnal chart? Is it a nocturnal chart? Where is everything placed? Really, I mean, Saturn will be sort of in the individual's public sphere in some way. But whether it's positive, negative, whatever yeah, I'm not really good at those those general sort of questions. Yeah, I think too much in specifics. There should be a pithy little sort of general answer for that question. Um, but it's not really my bag, summoning something pithy and concise for something that broad in general. Lots of astrologers who are much better at that than me. So, play to your strengths, as they say. Um, all right. Well, I did want to show my database. Oh, you're thinking about Saturn in Pisces. Okay, not Saturn in the 10th house. Yeah, Saturn in Pisces. I mean, I can talk a little bit about that. Ignore you. But you're asking me questions. How am I supposed to ignore you if you're asking me questions? That does not compute. Um, well, I'll show you what I have in my file about Saturn in Pisces and what sort of periods have coincided with it. As always, I like to sort of just let the astrology kind of speak for itself, and maybe I can comment on some of the stuff. But it makes a lot more sense than just. Um, all right, so here's another thing I can do. Saturn in Pisces. So I'm going to go to Saturn and Pisces, and I'm going to search for charts that have Saturn and Pisces. But what I'm going to do instead, I have this arrangement of files. I'm going to say choose selected files. So rather than just look in Turkish history, because rather than just pick from 86 charts, what I'm going to do is I'm going to search the whole database. I have a set of files that covers all the nativities and all the event charts in my database. This is sort of like a general set of files. Not they're not the ones that I'll be putting up for sale. But everything that's in these files will be put up for sale in other sort of smaller files. So if I look for Saturn in Pisces here, and I'm going through the ages, Just give it a minute here. It's still computing. And still only in 1966. It's going to have to get to the 90s. All right. So this is it so far. We can see, I'm just going backwards. So even in January of 2026, Saturn will be just leaving Pisces at that point for good. But the last time it was in Pisces was back in the 90s. 94, 95, 96. This was exactly, Saturn was in Pisces when I started studying astrology, actually, in January of 95. And there was a brief ingress in 93 as well. And then prior to that, it was in the 60s, sort of early 67, 1966, 1965, and part of 64. In 64, it was sort of going in and out. And then prior to that, there was this period. Oh, yeah. I should say this period in the 60s is particularly important because around 65, 66, what you had was the opposition. You had Uranus and Pluto in Virgo opposite Saturn in Pisces. And that really sort of made this a very different experience of Saturn in Pisces. And my feeling is that the following returns to Saturn in Pisces still sort of reverberate to this period in the mid-60s. So much would change in this culture at the time. So prior to the 60s, I'll come back to that in a bit. But prior to the 60s, it was in the 1930s, just very early 1938 is when it left, but all through 1937, all through 1936. So in this period, I often think of it relative to the Spanish Civil War, which preceded the Second World War. The Second World War having broken out while Saturn was in Aries going into Taurus. But you can see 1935, 36, 37. I guess it was in early 35 that it went in there. There we are. Okay. Billie Holiday. Okay. And then prior to that, it was in the first decade of the 20th century. It looks like just part of 1908, very early 1908. So 1907, 1906, 1905. Yeah, starting in 1905. At the time of the first Russian Revolution, the Battle of the Straits of Tsushima, and the mutiny on the battleship Potemkin, all that amazing stuff. But also W.E. Du Bois's Niagara movement, the first meeting which would create the NAACP. So yeah, prior to that, we get to the 1870s, 1879, 78, 77, 76. This is the time of I believe, Custer's Last Stand will be around this during the Red 3 Venus retrograde, Saturn in Pisces, and so some of that stuff that you've heard of. Let's see, Queen Victoria being proclaimed Empress of India. How regal of her! How presumptuous of her! Hey, we were just talking about the Ottoman Empire. This is in 1877, when Russia declared war on the Ottoman Empire for the Balkans. So yeah, different things like that. I think we even have some battles here. And then prior to the 1870s, it was the 1840s. This was the other period, or one of the other periods in the 19th century when Saturn was in Pisces, and there were a lot of rebellions. In Ceylon, Ireland. This is in the middle of the potato famine. The Seneca Falls Convention on Women's Rights, with everyone there. Let's see. Okay, there's something in Hungarian history with the Hungarian outbreak. Just a lot of sort of revolutionary stuff. The Swiss Constitution is adopted. Like the 60s, I think this particular one had a lot of sort of revolutionary action, because it's a bit different. In this case, what you would have towards the end of this revolutionary period, as Saturn would leave Pisces, it would join up with Uranus and Pluto in a conjunction. But this period really is kind of like the 60s. It's the gold rush. It's Henry David Thoreau's civil disobedience, and it's when the Communist Manifesto was written. But at the same time, yeah, all this, Ireland, Austria, Ceylon, Seneca Falls, Paris, all this stuff is going on. Hungary, all these different revolutions are blowing up, and then it sort of culminates in 1849 as that sort of revolution is put down. So it does kind of remind me of the 60s, that period, very radical. And then prior to that, we had Saturn in Pisces, sort of shortly after Napoleon was defeated in Waterloo, sort of in the new concert of Europe era. Started going from 1817 rather up until early 1820, when King George III finally died. And this is right when I think Queen Victoria rather has just been born. Right there she is. And then beyond that, I have other coverage. We can get to the 1790s, the very early days of the French Revolution. Here's the Women's March, and the U.S. Proposal, the Bill of Rights, but also the famous storming of the Bastille. So it's the people are up in arms. All the very early stuff in the French Revolution, and the early stuff in the sort of the early days of Washington's first presidency. He's literally, when Washington was first inaugurated president, Saturn was in Pisces. So all that stuff, the Bill of Rights, and everything he was dealing with in that first presidency, it occurred when Saturn was in Pisces. And then you go back to the 1750s, the 1730s, the 1670s, Newton, this famous earthquake, that the last Cascadia subduction zone earthquake in the year 1700, the one that, funny enough, we're just having a Saturn return of now. And this is the famous earthquake that's supposed to level the Pacific Northwest, or could conceivably level the Pacific Northwest. And the last time it rumbled was January 27th, 1700. And yeah, I was just noticing that we're on the Saturn return of that now. Not that I necessarily have any evidence that Saturn returns trigger, earthquake responses or anything like that. I'm just saying, I certainly hope they don't, and that I haven't noticed it yet, because I'm sitting right in the liquefaction zone as we speak, or as I speak. I'm the one doing the talking. And then, Montreal. Montreal is such a Piscean city. This is a chart from when the cross was placed. For those of you who have been to Mount Royal, there's a cross, a big lit cross on the mountain. When the first cross was put on the mountain, that was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Pisces. And even the chart for the founding of the city, this is the time chart that Axel Harvey rectified with historical research. And it's so classic Montreal: Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn in Pisces, with a Sun-Neptune opposition in, Venus, Pluto under the beams. Well, not that Pluto can be under the beams, but you know what I mean. This chart always speaks volumes to me about my home. And I guess the oldest chart I have that has Saturn in Pisces is one of the oldest charts in the database altogether, which is a famous battle that Alexander the Great has against Darius III, the Battle of Gaugamela, which is sort of the decisive battle between the Macedonians and the Persians. So there you go. Saturn was in Pisces. This is back in the year 331 BC, and that's how far back you go. So look, there's, oh yes, Chiron was in Pisces in the 60s. Thank you for that, Stephanie. So Saturn in Pisces, it means different things at different times. I do think it tends to be the sort of What I do see, especially like in the 1840s, in the 1930s, the 1960s, and even that period in the 1990s, um, is when you really have this huge kind of culture shift, and the sort of like the power sort of comes up from the rises from the bottom as opposed to being sort of imposed from the top. Um, Saturn in Pisces, this was the period in the Clinton presidency, for instance, in the 90s, where he really got that sort of that huge pushback, like the by-election of 1994 in November during the Venus retrograde in Scorpio. Those by-elections are usually during red twos or blue twos, for those of you who know my Venus synodic work. Um, in that period, that election in November of 94 is when you really got the ascension of the Republican movement as we kind of know it today, this sort of like really ultra conservative Reaganite, would be Reaganite sort of wing of the Republicans. So the party hadn't really been that until November of 94. And I think of that being sort of Saturn in Pisces. You'll see like these rise ups of the left or the right. I mean, think of the mid 60s and the Saturn in the mid 60s, in an American context. That's the period, Malcolm X is killed during Saturn in Pisces. Martin Luther King dies when Saturn's in Aries, but Malcolm X dies when Saturn's in Pisces. Uh, um, and it's sort of where there's a transference in the whole civil rights movement from the sort of the nonviolent resistance to sort of the more militant wing of Black activism in the 60s. As Saturn in Pisces is when Stokely Carmichael calls for Black power, and you're seeing that sort of that move from the earlier and more sort of integrated and nonviolent, civil rights movement, as it was called, and then in the Saturn in Pisces, it sort of shifts into this more sort of militant and less focused on nonviolent resistance, and focus more on simply resistance. Period. So yeah, you see those shifts, and the same thing happens in the 1840s. Like I showed you, it's a time when the likes of Thoreau and Marx, who are proposing these sort of different responses to politics. I mean, that's Thoreau's work on civil disobedience is exactly. I mean, it's the first text that I know of that proposes nonviolent resistance. It's the text that will inspire Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and then, ironically, so many Saturn returns in Pisces later, it's deemed ineffective or inappropriate to the means. I think it's at this very time that Stokely Carmichael says that the problem with conscientious objection is that it only works if your opponent has a conscience. So yeah, that's sort of a devastating riposte to Thoreau's work and whatever sort of it achieved in through the efforts of the likes of Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Certainly by the time Saturn's in Pisces is when Nelson Mandela is being sentenced to prison. I mean, he's a good example of someone who went from a sort of a nonviolent resistance perspective to sort of more, direct activism. Although by the time he was arrested, I think, he was arrested when Saturn was in Aquarius, but he was sentenced to prison in a mixed race trial with 10 other defendants from the ANC, and they were all sentenced to life in prison. Yeah, that was Saturn in Pisces. So it's really, you see these different sort of uprising movements culminate, but they also they go to some more sort of like things get more sort of something sort of takes hold, and there's a real shift in the culture. It almost feels like some whole new group of people has come in, even though, or that the existing group has really changed and grown. Stokely Carmichael himself is someone who came from the sort of the nonviolent resistance movement, the core group, and became more radicalized, and over the course of Saturn and Pisces. So he's a good example of someone that like how people transform, or how their convictions grow. I hope that that helps. Anyway, I'm thinking politically. Maybe you're thinking sort of more personally, but that's a sort of, in horoscopes, it's going to mean different stuff. Depending on what Pisces means to you, depending on what planets you have in Pisces, depending on what house in your chart Pisces falls in. There's no sort of, I don't believe in, or I'm ill-equipped to make pithy summarizing statements about things like that. I really go to the database and I look at the sort of the times, and maybe also get a sense of people born with the planet, and conjure my ideas from there. Um, Nada is saying, hi from Belgrade. What are my thoughts on upcoming Mars Uranus transit and the new moon? Moon at 21 Leo, Venus replies. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I mean, insofar as like where your moon and Venus are, that's something for a chart reading. Again, I don't like to say things sort of obscurely. I don't know where your moon is, and we're not going to get into your chart. I'm not really sort of. This isn't so much a place where I give horoscope readings. It's what I do for a living. I mostly just talk about uh, mundane astrology and general things. So I don't mind answering the other question about the Mars Uranus transit. I don't really have any thoughts on the new moon. There's a new moon every month. Sometimes you get a lunation that does connect to, say, like, maybe it happens at the same degree of a recent planetary retrograde or something like that. But overall, um, I don't have any thoughts on it. But Mars Uranus conjunctions, we can look at some past ones. Okay, have I remembered to share my screen, or is it like those old days? Oh, I almost went and didn't share my screen. Some of my old viewers will remember I used to be really useless at remembering to show my screen, and like at least once per live stream, I would forget to do it. Okay, so here we are. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to search my whole database for charts that have a Mars-Uranus conjunction, but I'm going to use a tighter orb. I'm going to use like a 3-degree orb instead of 5 degrees. And here we go. Otherwise, it gives me way too many solutions. Um, okay. So 2011, 2007, 2005, 2003. This is the one I remember most in 2003, because it happened with a Mars retrograde in Pisces, as Uranus was just going into Pisces. That was really what made, define 2003 really well. Yeah, this is a chart for, I don't know if you guys ever saw the documentary about this guy, Timothy Treadwell. There's a great Werner Herzog documentary about him. He was a guy who went and lived amongst bears. Eventually, he was killed by bears. This is what this chart is for. Is when he and his girlfriend were attacked by bears who were not familiar to him. But he was someone who had befriended other bears. He just he thought since he had befriended some bears that he was like friend to all bears. But yeah, he ran afoul of the wrong one, and that happened to him. But also something else right around the same, like just 2 days earlier, was when Roy Horn, Sigmund and Roy, they were doing this. They have all these tigers that they use in this stage act in Las Vegas, and Roy Horn was attacked by a tiger with this Mars Uranus. So yeah, that's one of the things I think. Timothy Treadwell's attacked by the bear, and Roy Horn's attacked by tigers. Lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. Um, and yeah, it can be kind of dangerous. You might have people doing dangerous things, like trying to make friends with bears in Alaska, or trying to use tigers as circus acts, and there are repercussions to that. um, so from the start, I think that it's got some sort of element of being reckless, or as the show was called when Britney and Kevin Federline had their reality show in 2005, chaotic. This is this is the first episode of the Britney Spears Kevin Federline reality show back in 2005. It just caught my eye. That was also a Mars Uranus thing. What other sort of reckless things? Oh yes, when back when Ben, some of you younger people won't remember this because Affleck and Lopez, they're married now, aren't they? Um, um, but they had this big relationship, so one of these big celebrity relationships back in '02, '03, and when they broke up, they canceled their wedding ceremony during a Mars-Uranus conjunction, which is really funny because they did eventually wind up getting back together. But there you go. There's that Mars-Uranus when that happened. Um, okay, there's Kobe Bryant. This is this case that he would go on trial for this assault case. This is a chart I made at the time, I think, before the legal case even happened. I think this is from the news story at the time. And oh yes, I was just thinking about the death of George Harrison. Um, George Harrison, my favorite Beatle, I think. Um, well, they're all my favorites. He died of throat cancer. I think the reckless thing here is that the story is like he had quit smoking for a very long time and then just sort of picked it up absentmindedly, and then got cancer because he had sort of picked it up again, even though he had quit for a good long time. So it's really sort of unfortunate and tragic in that way. Um, let's see, what else do we have here? What other Mars-Uranus reckless acts? Well, I don't know. Barack Obama was elected the president of the Harvard Law Review. I don't know if that was necessarily reckless. Maybe it was. Oh yeah, Jimmy Swaggart's famous tearful admission of having sex with a prostitute on live TV. Again, you would have to look this up if you're younger, but this was a really big moment in pop culture at the time with this TV evangelist Jimmy Swaggart. This guy who would just sort of preach all kinds of really intense histrionic, biblical commandments and things. And of course, it turned out he was a total hypocrite and was having sex with prostitutes in motels and things like that. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but being, the hypocrisy, of course, is the crime. Rihanna has a Mars-Uranus, and so does that guy, Tim Pool, the guy who never takes his hat off. Neocon dude. All right, what else is sort of there was a bomb explosion at the Montreal train station. We occasionally have terrorism. A bomb went off at an Aerosmith concert in 1978. I'm just looking. Oh, the Rumble in the Jungle when Muhammad Ali defeated George Foreman. Those of you who've seen the documentary, When We Were Kings. This is this famous battle when Muhammad Ali won his title for the second time. Joaquin Phoenix was born right around that same time. Jane Fonda being arrested for, I think, drugs on an airplane. I don't think that this is before the whole political thing. What other good examples can I find here? I don't know. Well, this is kind of interesting. Hunter S. Thompson wrote an article about motorcycle gangs for the nation, which was later expanded into a book. But this was the first sort of article he wrote about it. And you can see it's during the Mars-Uranus opposite Saturn in this period in 1965. Remember, this is in the 60s when everything's sort of getting a little more serious, a little more adult. Everyone's changing and getting more, growing in ways. So that's kind of interesting. Motorcycle gangs, Mars-Uranus, rebellion, chaos, anarchy. I don't think anarchy is necessarily chaos. Some people use it use the term as though it's synonymous with chaos. I don't subscribe to that. I should avoid that. Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters being arrested in a police raid. There's that same Mars-Uranus opposite Saturn. Some murders, the hanging for murders. This was Truman Capote's book in Cold Blood. Got these two men convicted of murder, and this is their execution chart. The Shah of Iran escaping a marble palace shooting. He would be in power for another 13 years and then eventually have to leave due to a coup. This is even when Hunter S. Thompson was asked to write the Hells Angels article. There was that same configuration still happening. Oh yeah, Che Guevara giving the Cuban address to the United Nations. So this is a very sort of defiant speech. Of course, the United Nations being located in New York City, and Che Guevara flies in there, and yeah, he's very critical of American foreign policy. Um, Martin Luther King accepting his Nobel Prize. I think that, sort of speaks for itself. It was definitely sort of radical. Malcolm X speaking at a debate at Harvard College. This is about 2 months before he's shot. Um, yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that's it. As usual, I like to sort of talk about things by example rather than just sort of offer a kind of abstract summary. Um, okay. Earthquake and tsunami. Okay. Thank you, Linda. Um, okay. Just reading all the comments. I didn't look at the opposition. I'll have to get to that in another live stream. Yeah, I did know Jimmy Swaggart is the cousin of Jerry Lee Lewis and Mickey Gilley. I have a book that's like a combined biography of the three of them. All right, I'm going to finish up just by looking at earthquakes quickly. Um, I'm really busy these days, so it's hard for me to get past a 1 hour live stream, to be honest. But I do enjoy doing this. I can't do it for too long. But yeah, I don't, again, earthquakes are something that I've done a little bit of work on. There's a lot of subjects where I've done a little bit of work, and then a bunch of subjects where I've done a lot of work. One hopes eventually. Let's see, where's my earthquakes? I can just search the term earthquake, and I know I've got a few. Do I have an earthquake? If I thought I might. Okay. All right, so I'm just doing a quick search here for charts with earthquakes. There's some things like, okay, Tori Amos had an album called Little Earthquakes. That doesn't count. There was a movie called Earthquake. That's an earthquake relief concert. But all these others are earthquakes. Okay, so it's not a lot. Looks like it's about 20 or so. Oh, I forgot Aaron Carter's another earthquake CD. I left that in there. Whoops. Okay. So yeah, I mean, in my experience, just to answer the general question, I find that you can see any number of configurations. Like this famous Calcutta one is Saturn opposite Uranus. For some reason, I don't have a time for that one. I'll have to relook that. This is a famous one that happens in Lisbon. It really changes the course of European history in many ways. This is Mars approaching its retrograde transit, but okay, like, I mean, what, Pluto square the nodes, Pluto square Uranus. It's Mars opposite Saturn, maybe, but nothing that makes you think earthquake. This is that Cascadian subduction zone one I was looking at not long ago. Here, I'll put the angles in. These are time charts. Most of these should be. So yeah, what? Mars opposite the moon, sun opposite Pluto. Well, what do you think? Mercury station direct conjunct Jupiter. What's making these things happen? Sort of wide Uranus Neptune square. San Francisco, 1906. I had an ancestor, a great uncle or something like that, who had a tavern. He was German, and his tavern was destroyed in the San Francisco earthquake. So then he moved back to Germany, and then I think he lost his life in the war or something like that. So it's like, you can't win, buddy. Um, but yeah, this is the famous San Francisco earthquake that leveled the city in 1906. Um, yeah, what do you think is happening here, astrologically speaking, that tells you there's going to be an earthquake? I really don't see like a distinct pattern one way or the other. Something is escaping me anyway. But I've heard all kinds of astrologers say, make this or that statement about earthquakes, like they always happen during this configuration or during an eclipse or whatever. Like, okay, this one happens to be close to an eclipse. This was an earthquake in Iran in 1929. Iran, of course, is a really big earthquake zone. So this one happens to be during an eclipse, but or close to it. But like a lot of this one isn't, and this one isn't, and this one isn't. So yeah, I always hear these claims made, and then I pull out these 20 charts of earthquakes I have, and and instantly I see that these generalizations sort of fall short. They might be true of, excuse me, they might be true of one or two earthquakes, but they're by no means like these definitive indicators. And I really defy anyone to make an astrological, like a general astrological statement that speaks to every earthquake you've ever had. Now, this is another one that's close to an eclipse. This was an earthquake in Long Beach in 1933. So this one, this does look like an earthquake chart to me, but this is the first one out of like how many, 7 that I've looked at that really looks like an earthquake chart, right? And, because you've got the eclipse with the Mars, Neptune, Jupiter on the moon south node side, and then all the stuff here in Pisces, and a Uranus Pluto square. So then I'm like, oh, okay, maybe this looks like an earthquake, but more so than a lot of the others, which were also devastating. This is one in Nicaragua in 1972. Um, yeah, Mexico City in 1985. Not close to an eclipse. I mean, Venus square Saturn, really? That makes earthquakes? I don't know. San Francisco 89. Some of you might remember this. This is one I wasn't there for this, but I was there the year before this happened and a couple of years after this happened. So I kind of remember the before and after of this one. So sure, you had this stellium of planets here being squared by Mercury, but not opposed by Jupiter, and maybe that doesn't in this instance. But again, I have a hard time just finding that one, uh, you know, uh, just general astrological statement that applies to every single earthquake. It doesn't exist. There's another one from Iran in 1990. Northridge, California in 1994. And this one, again, you have a cluster of planets, but it's not close to an eclipse. Nazrin, Afghanistan. This was the tsunami near Indonesia. Whoops. Sorry, I accidentally pulled out my headphones. This was the tsunami at the day after Christmas near Indonesia back in 2004. I remember I was hanging out with friends in Washington, D.C. this night when we found out this happened. It was really devastating. This was another earthquake in Iran in 1997. Okay. And 2003. Yeah, Iran really gets a lot of them. But I'm just not seeing that one. Okay, I think I've already looked at one. Some of these might be here twice for some reason. And this is the tsunami that hit Japan, of course, Fukushima. And yeah, okay, so this one has Uranus squaring the nodes, but it's not really. Yeah, there's no pattern. There's no pattern. it's a really worthwhile subject to study. It would be really great to be able to predict earthquakes with astrology, but I'm just not seeing it. Yes, Nada, you're right. Israel has a 21 degrees Taurus sun, or something around that. It'll be highly impacted by the Mars-Uranus opposition. I did mention that in the episode that's airing tomorrow from the Astrology podcast. I mentioned, thank you for contributing that. But yeah, I saw the same thing, and I mentioned that to Chris during the episode. So you'll see that tomorrow when that comes out. Yeah, I wasn't looking at the Tonga eruption, but I just, I think I made my point. I could enter in a lot more sort of charts of eclipses and tsunamis in here. It'd be really worthwhile, and I certainly plan to do that. But you can see just from a survey of 20 eclipse charts, they really can look very, very different from each other. And there's no one single theme that you're going to find that's going to allow you to narrow down and predict them. At least not what I can see. I'm happy for people to keep trying, and if I've overlooked something, that's fine. But even with just such a small sampling of examples, I think you can see it's hard to do. It's a fool's errand. All right, with that in mind, folks, I'm going to log off. Thank you all for contributing and showing up. And as always, it's a real pleasure doing this. Very informal, very loose, very sort of spontaneous and in the moment. This is not a scripted show. It's just me turning on the camera and figuring out what I'm going to do in the moment. So I hope you enjoy what I do. If you do, please do check in with me every Monday. I do this. Sundays, of course, I do the team stream with Patrick Watson. That one's always a bit more lively because it's the two of us bantering as opposed to myself just, ranting on my own like a lunatic. So yeah, some people like the team dynamic. Sometimes it's, I guess, fun just to have me do what I do on my own. But either way, do check in. I can be found at nickdaganbestastrologer.com. That's my website. I'm a available and working astrologer, available for chart readings, electionals, relocation, rectification, you name it. Your one-stop shop for all things astrology. So come book me if you're looking for someone to give you a consultation. And ad libbing and not ranting. That's fine. I was just being hyperbolic. I do that a lot. All right, everyone. Have yourselves a great week, and I look forward to seeing you next Sunday. And ciao for now. Oh, and check out the Astrology podcast episode tomorrow. All right. Ciao.